Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's videos. We're going to dive into both Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, as well as their early returns through their first two games as Dallas Mavericks. Now, the Mavericks did pay a lot to get these two guys in the building, but I think that they've been big additions for their team so far this season. The Mavericks have been playing very well since acquiring them. Also, were playing pretty well before the trades, as they're now on a 5-game win streak before Wednesday night's game against the San Antonio Spurs, and I think now's a great time to look at those pieces that they brought in and how have Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington helped the Mavericks this year. Again, a lot of still long-term cost in those trades, but I do think it's worth looking at, hey, what's the film say early on as Gafford, who's been excellent for them, averaging over 17 points, 13 rebounds in his first two games, and then PJ Washington averaging about 11 to 12 points per game and just 5 boards in his first two games with the Mavericks. Both of them have flashed some very important things that are worth looking at. So let's jump into first Daniel Gafford, who has been excellent for the Mavericks. And really, this is a great place to start. It's his first ever basket as a Dallas Maverick, and it's the first half-court offensive possession he was ever a part of with the Dallas Mavericks. And in this situation here, you see Luka Doncic is set up on the right wing with a defender close in on him, and the Thunder are trying to shrink the floor around that. You see PJ Washington's off the left wing, and Daniel Gafford's down in the opposite dunker spot. And I think this really kind of ties into what we've seen with Derek Lively this year as well, and why having Gafford just gives the Mavericks good center play for 48 minutes a night, something that they haven't had since maybe 2011 when they won the NBA title. And I think that Gafford's appearance and emergence onto the roster definitely does give them just another really good lob threat. And I want to highlight the early work here that Gafford's doing. You see, as he's bodying for position here down low with Isaiah Joe, he actually carves out a really good amount of room where, with his strength, he sets up a really nice lob opportunity here for Luka Doncic, one of the best passers in the league. And you're going to see throughout the entire duration of this video how Luka Doncic is honestly just one of those best offensive engines in NBA history, how he can maximize other talent, other players around him. But Gafford does a lot of this early work to set this play up. As you see, the ball goes up in the air. Gafford catches the ball at a astounding high point. And as Doncic and Lively have been one of the most frequent connectors on lob opportunities this year, I think Gafford gives Dallas another player who can do that for them. And in this instance, his very first basket as a Dallas Maverick, of course, it turns into a lob dunk, a big-time play, and Gafford's excited about it. And again, let's just get another look at it here. Just watch the early work he does low on Isaiah Joe, sets up this play entirely, and it's just a beautiful lob dunk. The next play, I think, is one that's really stood out to me. Here, the Mavericks are running their typical horns action. Josh Green sets the first screen. Daniel Gafford sets the second one. And then with Luka going downhill at Chet, who's playing in super deep drop, honestly, I would say uncompetitive drop coverage. Luka Doncic probably could just walk into a pull-up mid-range jump shot if he wants to here. But Luka also is analyzing and seeing where Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's at in this play. After the Gafford screen, he is completely out of the picture, giving them a 2-on-1 where they're probably going to get a wide-open shot at the rim, unless Cason Wallace tags in super low. Then you're probably going to have a Tim Hardaway Jr. corner three-pointer. So Doncic, even though he might have that mid-range pull-up, he's not going to settle for that in this clip. You see he continues to work low, gathers the ball now at this point, maybe even has PJ Washington in a strong side little dig help from Isaiah Joe. But again, doesn't decide to settle here. Keeps the ball strong. Now Holmgren's at a spot where, wow, Doncic is getting really close to the rim. Has to help, and at this point, the ball is floated up there for Gafford, who maybe wasn't ready for that lob. But watch his determination here and his coordination. This is a play that, as I was watching this game, watching their debuts, this play really stood out to me as this is something the Mavericks have not had around Luka Doncic in his entire career, which is a coordinated big man who has the hands, the capability to come down with 50-50 balls like this. And not only does he have that, he has the ability to finish some of those plays as well. Let's watch it again in full speed here. Again, the horns action. Doncic gets downhill, draws in the defense, and the coordination, the activity level, all things we've seen so far from Gafford in his first two games all come to fruition here in a big-time bucket. And you see PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford are hyped up about it. Just, again, this is why you want good screen and roll players next to Doncic. I love the Derek Lively draft pick. And Gafford is a player I've liked for a long time. And I think that in Washington, we've seen him be successful with players like Jordan Poole, Monte Morris, Tyus Jones. Now you supersize that into an all-NBA caliber player like Luka Doncic, who should be really in the mix for MVP this year. You're looking at what is a dream fit for Gafford's play style and what he brings to the table. And this is another great example here. You're going to see, again, another high action here off of this. This is just normal standard high pick and roll. Mavs are spacing the floor pretty well here, giving Doncic and Gafford really the entire middle of the court to work with, something very standard in Dallas. And here, Marvin Bagley tags out very high. He's playing above the level of the screen. Gafford, this is one of the areas that separates him even from Derek Lively, I believe, as someone who is really quick. Daniel Gafford's got all the physical tools you're looking for. He's big, he's strong, he's athletic, he gets downhill quickly. And on top of that, he's got good hands. This is a nice mid-roll pass. He doesn't technically short roll it, something we see Joel Embiid do a ton in Philadelphia. He doesn't quite long roll it like we've seen already in this video, and we don't actually have that real downhill drive from Doncic as he's gotten blitzed, something that Doncic faces a ton. But this will be really important for Dallas to continue having their big men capable of capitalizing on this play. And post-trade deadline, like I tweeted out the day of the trade, they went from having one dynamic roll man in Derek Lively to now having three, if you include Gafford and PJ Washington. Gafford here gets really down to the restricted area, has a nice power dribble, gets Kuzma off balance, goes up with a nice righty hook. This is just something Dallas has not had in their repertoire over the last couple of years, and I think having a player like this next to Luka Doncic is going to do their team a bunch of wonders. And we're just talking the offensive end of the floor. We know what Daniel Gafford can do as a shot blocker as well. This case, just a great example of some of the more physical prowess that Gafford brings to the team. Just looking at him, watch him run the floor here. He has Marvin Bagley beat. He's further down the floor than Bagley, and because of that, you get a switch here where now Bagley's technically going to be matched up with Kyrie Irving, and Kuzma has to tag Gafford on the roll. And funny enough, former teammates, Kuzma's just not equipped to deal with that. Good touch again from Gafford, who's able to get the layup to go. Just another great example of his kind of coordination, his physical tools that he has, and why that's a perfect option for Dallas, whether he's playing off the bench as a backup big man or whether he starts the remainder of the year with Lively coming back healthy at some point. That remains to be seen, but either way, Dallas now has, again, like I mentioned, 48 minutes of consistent center play where they're able to screen, roll, and you have some extra stuff on top of that. Lively, a shot blocker, Gafford can block some shots, and the rebounding is definitely improved as well. He's been very active. Gafford recorded 17 rebounds in his most recent outing, and I think just is going to continue to be a high energy, high activity guy for Dallas, which is exactly what he needs to be. And then Doncic will reward him in the pick and roll game, which really is the key area here. This one, I want to restart over. Let's get very back to the start here. We got Chet Holmgren setting a screen out on Josh Green. And what Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is going to look to do here is he's going to try to split this. So he's going to try and take PJ Washington off the balance. But Washington and Josh Green both have pretty active hands in here. And again, the word that I keep using is active. And around Luka Doncic, what you need is a whole bunch of active players. Guys who move well without the ball on the offensive end. Guys who make plays in the defensive end. And this is one of those areas PJ Washington gives Dallas. Even I think he's a little bit of an underrated defender. Now, I wouldn't say he's a stopper. I wouldn't say he's an elite defender. But I think he's got the size and the length to at least impact other teams and other opposing players by just being active, being up at the level, being aggressive on the defensive end of the floor, and using his length and size. Here we get a poke away that triggers a fast break transition play, and it's really fitting. PJ Washington starts this, Daniel Gafford ends it. It's just a great culmination of the two new faces in Dallas kind of combining together to form a really unique identity that the Mavericks just haven't had around Luka Doncic, which is a lot of speed, athleticism, and transition play. I remember last year watching Kyrie Irving's debut with the Mavericks and thinking, wow, this is the fastest I've seen this team play probably in the entire Doncic era. And now you kind of supersize that. You get more speed, more athleticism, more size into that mix, and the players who play around that very, very well. You think about what Josh Green is. He's a highly athletic wing who gets up and down the floor relatively quickly. We know Tim Hardaway Jr. thrives in transition as an early shot clock shooter. He loves to shoot early in possessions. He loves those pull-up threes, and I think having this identity of players who are going to be willing to play fast, play quick, and be decisive in transition is going to help Dallas a lot. And the more often they're able to trigger transition opportunities like this with hit-ahead passes and a little bit of showtime flair on it, the better the Mavericks are going to be. PJ Washington here. This is a low post, mid post opportunity against Jordan Poole. The Mavericks in their most recent game against the Washington Wizards just targeted Jordan Poole a ton. You're not seeing every single basket between Washington and Gafford, but you're seeing a good deal of them in this video. And PJ Washington just basically post spins him into death. And at this point, this kind of sets up everything that we need to talk about here for this play. PJ Washington gathers around the middle of the floor, gets up in the air, and now with his touch, his ability to score the basketball, you see Marvin Bagley kind of lose Gafford in the dunker spot. I talked about that earlier. In fact, the very first play I showed you guys was Daniel Gafford operating out of the dunker spot, being a lob threat from there. This time he does a good job of relocating as his man loses eyesight on him. Gafford relocates to the other side of the rim, and Washington makes a nice little dump-off pass. And I think the big thing here is you're getting another player with PJ Washington who's capable of making some plays off the dribble. Again, you see a nice little two-dribble play, nice little dump-off pass to Gafford. And really, I love what Gafford's given Dallas so far. I think PJ Washington, it's going to kind of ebb and flow. He's a little bit more of a streaky scorer. So if you're banking on his production to be there, I don't know if you're going to get exactly what you want as a 16, 17 point per game scorer. I just don't expect that to really be what he does for them. But I think he's going to give you moments like this where Doncic isn't required to create all the offense. Kyrie's not kind of asked to create all of the offense for this team. And that's really the hope. Again, we're looking at another post-up, basically same spot on the floor. This is a little bit later in the game, and you might be saying, well, okay, what if teams just let PJ Washington play one-on-one? Even here in this, he gets to a nice spot on the floor, playing one-on-one with Ousmane Dieng. This is a pretty long post hook, and he's still able to get it to go because, again, he's a skilled player with some touch. This is something Grant Williams just was never going to give the Dallas Mavericks, which you have to ask yourself, which way did you want to build this team? Because Grant Williams, he's been playing his career numbers, had a pretty nice game for Charlotte just earlier this week. I do think Grant Williams is still a quality player. I know Mavericks fans will disagree with me. It's just, what is your expectation? Grant Williams isn't going to be the best player to attack closeouts, but he shoots the ball relatively well, even though he's somewhat hesitant. Yes, he's not a true shooter. He's somebody who converts on a pretty decent amount of his three-point attempts. PJ Washington, a less efficient three-point shooter, but more capable putting the ball on the floor, scoring in other ways, and you see it here with, again, I would say a pretty nice post hook, something that Dallas, this is a real interesting question for me, is how much does Dallas go to this? Does PJ Washington become their third scorer? I'm a little skeptical on that front, if that actually happens or not, but nonetheless, it gives them at least another half-court offense. This one here, another screen option. You see a horns action here again, Kyrie Irving being the small, setting that first screen, and then PJ Washington will set the second one, really at the heart of what Dallas does. But instead here, he sees Kyle Kuzma step up and slips it. And again, with Doncic's passing ability, there's not a pass on the floor that Doncic can't make. This is a super easy pass for him. For a lot of other people, this might be pretty difficult. But when you have a top 5 player in the world, it just opens up different avenues, and this is something PJ Washington was not experiencing in Charlotte. Catching at the middle of the floor in what is a spread 3-on-2 with Hardaway Jr. and Kleber in both corners, you're putting the Wizards defense in a pretty tough bind here just because of the gravity of both Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. You see 3 players defending those two. It gives PJ Washington a ton of space at the nail. Maxi Kleber's wide open, but PJ Washington, again, we're referencing his skill and touch as a shot maker. This little floater is not something Dallas has been able to get to very often with Doncic. And I think if you even go back to his 73-point game, the way that the Hawks were double teaming him at the end, PJ Washington's presence would have been a huge help in that game as well, just by being able to hurt teams who are going to so aggressively double Doncic at the point of attack in all of the different screen actions that Dallas runs. Now, this is my favorite play for PJ Washington. I'm going to let it play through once here, and then we're going to pause it at the very start just so you guys can really see what's going on in this. Luka Doncic is loving this. We're looking at a horns action, but this is actually a big horns, and I love this set specifically for Dallas for a couple of different reasons. You have PJ Washington setting that first screen, Daniel Gafford setting the second one. So if you had to bet what's going to happen here, you're probably thinking PJ Washington more of the perimeter player. He probably screens and fades, and then you're also going to have maybe Gafford screen and roll. That's kind of what the defense is getting ready for, but it's important to watch what Tim Hardaway Jr. is doing here on the backside. This is called stack action. For Mavericks fans, you've probably seen Luka Doncic do this a time or two when it comes to calling plays for the Mavericks. Mavericks, with especially Doncic's European history and experience, they run a lot of Spain action. And Spain action is when you have a back screen for your original roller, someone who is setting a screen and rolling, receiving a back screen, opening them up to the rim. Here, PJ Washington is that initial screener, and watch what Tim Hardaway Jr. is doing. Isaiah Joe is somewhat concerned about Tim Hardaway Jr. as a shooter. So now at this point, he's trying to communicate to Case and Wallace that, hey, we might have to switch this. And if you look at the size matchup, you already gotten OKC, who's a smaller team, into a little bit of trouble here already just with the matchups and how they're looking across the board. Dallas has 2 bigs on the floor. Oklahoma City doesn't really have the size to match that. We've seen that in other matchups this year for the Thunder, where some of their struggles are really, created because of the inability to match up with other size on the floor. But Hardaway sets a really great screen here, and we have to give Hardaway his props for this. This opens up the entire play, but this is the benefit of having one of the best passers in the world. This is about a 40-foot pass. It's an incredible pass. But already at this spot, Isaiah Joe's out of position. He's undersized, and Washington just climbs the ladder and throws it down. And this is a play that gets American Airlines Center rocking. It's a beautiful all-around play. Luka Doncic makes an otherworldly pass. And they're going to have a lot of options off of this, because if teams don't respect Tim Hardaway Jr. on this and they overplay PJ Washington on this back lob, you're going to see Hardaway be able to open up for threes. Otherwise, if they don't get anything on this initial Spain action, you still have the possibility of Gafford being a roll man, opening up certain things that way. And I think there's a lot of optionality here that Dallas's offense now can lean into a little bit more with the increased size and skill on the floor. One of the biggest things Mavs fans are going to reference here too with PJ Washington is his ability to attack closeouts. Now, if I'm coaching the Oklahoma City Thunder here, I don't want Chet Holmgren closing out this aggressively on PJ Washington. But he does, gets off balance. PJ Washington sells the shot fake, and at this point, he's an extremely talented player who, this is quite frankly something Grant Williams could never have done in Dallas. Attack a closeout like this, drive and kick, opens up Derrick Jones Jr., he makes another drive and kick off of the bad closeout from Case and Wallace, and PJ Washington sits in the dunker spot. You see Luka Doncic loves this play, and this is just one of those things PJ Washington gives you that, again, Grant Williams did not. Nice drive and kick, able to relocate into the dunker spot. Luka Doncic's gravity in the corner opens this all up for Dallas, and it's just another nice play for them that PJ Washington's skill, ability to put the ball on the floor, opens up, and he gets the nice flush. Then this is really the most important one. We're going back to that horns action here. Hardaway Jr. sets that first one. Gafford sets the second one. And like I referenced just a minute ago, the first screener fades, the second screener rolls. We have Gafford rolling to the rim now at this point. You see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander again screened out of position. Now you're putting Jalen Williams in a tough spot. So Aaron Wiggins is going to step in and try to tag Daniel Gafford. Earlier, we've seen how Gafford, if he doesn't get tagged properly, can be a nice play finisher on the back end. But when you have someone as good as Luka Doncic, he sees here Wiggins is flat-footed. He's got his back completely turned to PJ Washington. There's no way he's going to be able to effectively close out on Washington on the perimeter. This shot right here, Case and Wallace even makes a great effort trying to close this distance, and honestly gets much closer than you would expect. But this is still an open shot for NBA standards. And PJ Washington, this is going to be pivotal for him if he's able to knock this shot down consistently. The Mavericks have something really, really dangerous cooking, because PJ Washington needs to grow as a shooter. And the Mavericks have consistently over the years made bets that players will shoot better playing with Luka Doncic, which there's good science behind that. There's good data behind it. And of course, the reasoning is because they're going to be shooting much more open shots. Again, look at how open PJ Washington is in the corner here. They've made this bet in the past with someone like Josh Richardson, for example, when they traded Seth Curry for him a few years ago. Dallas has aggressively looked to add size, defense, and just raw downhill talent around Doncic rather than shooting skill. And I understand the idea behind that. I still would love for this team to have just a real shooter, someone who's a true sniper from behind the arc. But if PJ Washington can consistently make this, they become very, very tough because they have the size, they have the defense now, they've got more skill on the floor, and they're going to be generating open shots because of how good their offensive engine is. Now, again, Washington has to prove that. So far in his early returns for the Mavericks, he's made 1 3-pointer through 2 games. He has to be better than that, to be completely honest. For this trade to be a huge win for the Dallas Mavericks, he has to turn into a 36, 37, 38% 3-point shooter for the Mavericks to really be a threat. Anything below that is just kind of mediocre to sub-average in the NBA, so you can't really live with that trying to win NBA games, because in the playoffs, teams are going to make PJ Washington prove it. They're going to sag off of him just like how they do to Aaron Gordon of the Denver Nuggets. It doesn't mean you can't win that way. It just means that there's thinner margins. So you have to be really, really darn good in all of the other areas. And I think if we see PJ Washington start to really convert on his open three-point attempts, the Mavericks could be a real threat this year in the postseason. Now, when it comes to my final thoughts on the trades, you guys know how I feel about it. I think Dallas sacrificed way too much future flexibility in the deals. I love Daniel Gafford. I do. They did a nice job convincing Oklahoma City to help get the deal done by sending a 2024 first. Of course, it did cost them a 2028 pick swap. That might come back to hurt the Dallas Mavericks at some point in the future. I'm not denying that at all, because I think the Mavericks are a team that, with Luka Doncic having a player option in a couple of seasons, if he at any point asks out, they're screwed. They really are, because they owe 2027 now, top 2 protected to Charlotte, 2028 pick swap to now Oklahoma City. They owe their 2029 first unprotected to Brooklyn, and they owe the 2030 pick swap to San Antonio. So they're at a spot where they do not control their own future. If Doncic somehow, some way asks out, the team, even if they get a ton back, isn't in a great spot because they won't own their own future picks. So, people have pointed to Oklahoma City as a team that once they traded Paul George, they were able to rebuild. Part of why rebuilding worked so well for them is they were able to get Chet Holmgren second overall with their own draft choice. So the Mavericks don't have that future flexibility of, hey, if we bottom out and if we, start to tank, we're not even going to get our own top pick. So there is still a lot of risk. I'm very much a risk-averse person, which is why I didn't love the trades from the Mavericks. Now, the whole time I have not, kind of wavered on this. PJ Washington, Daniel Gafford make them a better team. They obviously are a better team. There's no denying that. The question is, are they good enough to really contend for a title? I'm a little bit more skeptical of that. Part of that because I just don't trust PJ Washington as a three-point shooter, and I still think that there's work to be done for this team when it comes to shooting the ball around Doncic. I still, like I said, would love another shooter in the fold. Giving up Seth Curry, I don't think he's really the type of player I mean more of a bigger, real shot maker. But at the end of the day, the Mavericks are a team that they made an aggressive move. We're hoping it works out for them. We really are. But I'm still a little skeptical on it. I think Gafford was perfect. And if you told me that the only move they made this deadline was for Gafford, I still think this team would have been greatly improved because they would have had 48 minutes of great center play. So the risk definitely made them better right now, but we'll see how it plays out in the next 4, 5, 6 years. I know a lot of viewers will say, well, who cares about 2027? Who cares about 2028? You will in 3 to 4 years. You'll be concerned about 2027 when the Mavericks don't have their pick if things go poorly, which at the end of the day, maybe Doncic never asks out, maybe things never go poorly, and then in that situation, maybe we're sending the 22nd pick in the draft to Charlotte, which isn't that bad. But if you're sending the 10th pick in the draft or anything around there, things probably went haywire. So that's what we really have to watch for over the next couple of years. I do think, again, I have to be very clear, PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford have made the team better. It's just to what level, what degree, are they a true contender now or not? When you have Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, you're definitely in that inner conversation, but I still think the Mavericks may be a player short. I still think that they need to find a way to get a third high-quality player on their roster, not a true star like Luka Doncic or Kyrie Irving, but someone who is a really good player, someone who's capable of averaging 17, 18 points per game around those two guys. I think that's what they're still lacking at this point in time, which is why I was a little more critical than most when it came to their trade deadline grades. But at the end of the day, the Mavericks are better now. I hope you guys did enjoy this film study. It was a lot of fun to talk about the Dallas Mavericks and how both Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington have impacted them early. Thanks again so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.